Out there, and welcome to today's Search Engine Journal webinar. Hope you're having a great day, and we're thrilled to have you here with us. And so today I'm joined by Amanda Milligan of Stacker Studio, and we're going to be talking about ways that you can improve your organic growth through earning links. Quality. Let's talk about it. So much these days is not about quantity. It's about the quality of everything in marketing and search. And so getting links back to your site should be all about that quality. So today, Amanda's going to talk with us about ways that you can improve your backlink profile in ways that really should equate to more relevant traffic to your site. And so before we get too deep, my name's Heather Campbell, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm going to go over some quick housekeeping, and then we're going to let Amanda get into it. She's got a really great deck for you today. There's some cool animations, and so should keep everybody engaged, and I'm ready to do this, but we'll do housekeeping super fast. Okay. So first, if you experience any technical difficulties, use the chat box to ask. There is a Q&A tab. So if you have any questions for Amanda, we're going to be taking those at the end of the presentation. So just put those in the questions box. For anybody that does see those questions, you can upvote them. So there's a little thumbs up button. If you like that question, you may want to make sure that we ask it. So just take a second to get familiar with those functions that are in the top right of your screen. And we'll also have a poll so that if that doesn't pop out for you, you can find that in the polls tab. So also there is closed captioning. It's in that top right corner. Just click that little CC button. And so we'll do our best to link to any resources or tools in the chat. But if we miss one, just ask, use that chat box to ask. Resources that we do talk about will also be included in your recap email. After the webinar, we ask that you do stick around. We take a short survey. It just takes like a minute or so, and it really helps us gauge what information works and how we can make SEJ webinars more useful for you all. So lastly, it's the most question that we ever get asked. You will absolutely receive this full recording after today's webinar. So with that, I'm going to let Amanda get to what she came here for, and I'll see you all at the Q&A.
All right. Thank you all so much for joining. This is probably my favorite topic. I say that about newsworthy content sometimes, but it fits into this overall topic. And I don't know if you've noticed this too, but I think that earning links is becoming trendier, for lack of a better term. And it seems like it's all semantics, but it's really not. And that's what I want to get into in this presentation. So improving your organic growth by shifting the mindset from building links to earning links. And at the start of this presentation, I thought to myself, how do I summarize this in 4 GIFs? So we're going to start with building links. I have a clip of Daenerys from Game of Thrones for any fans. Building links feels much more about like, I just need to get these links. I'll do whatever it takes. The links are the end goal. Don't care how we get them. We're going to get them. How much do they cost? I'll buy them, whatever it is, right? That's not necessarily how everybody builds links, but I think that the connotation around building links is often about the output and the final quote unquote product being the links. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Whereas earning links is a totally different perspective. It's about understanding why links exist in the first place, that it's this online reputation system that Google uses to assess whether your site is worthy of ranking for certain things. And then it's also about using that knowledge to actually provide value online. So you're creating content that's going to be valuable to your audience, whether it's useful or entertaining, hopefully always unique. And that's what's earning you the links that give you that credibility online. So before I jump into all that, I wanted to do a quick intro. My name is Amanda. I'm the head of marketing at Stacker Studio. Prior to this, I was at the agency Fractal for like 7 years. I've been in this space for a long time, focusing mostly on content, SEO relevant to content, and links. I've talked about this and complementary topics, whether it's tangential content or newsworthy content, how to create top of the funnel content, all of that for a variety of publications and at a variety of conferences like MozCon, SMX, PubCon, et cetera, et cetera. So despite my allergies, which have really messed up my voice today, I apologize for that. I could talk forever about this, as you'll see in the next half hour, 40 minutes or so. So outside of the GIF world, what is the difference between building and earning links? Building links, as I alluded to, is not really focused on how you get the links. It's only focused on the result of earning the links. If you're trying to be a link builder, you're thinking, I have to get a certain number of links, and that's all I care about. Usually that means that less value is provided to your audience. If you're paying for links, you're literally not creating anything that is valuable and worthy of being linked to, right? So you're kind of skipping, you're bypassing that whole element of links. And you can get some results from these kind of like lower quality link building efforts, but they're usually only going to affect one page, and it's usually pretty short term because you're not really doing this in a sustainable way. And again, you're not really providing anything that's building your authority in a grander sense. Whereas on the earning side, you are focused on creating something that's valuable. I used to refer to this at Fractal as link worthy content. So it is deserving of the links. So inherently, you're creating some kind of content that your audience will appreciate. And that has such wide reaching benefits that I will talk more about. So you usually also earn much better links as a result of putting more effort in. As you can imagine, people who pay for links, there's not like great links for sale. You're not going to get a link unless it's sponsored. That's a whole different story, and that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about earned organic links because Google doesn't really recognize, sponsored links as better understanding your reputation or your expertise because you paid for them, right? But if you're paying for links and let that seem organic, they're not always going to be that high of quality. You're not going to get the top links probably in your dream list by building them rather than earning them. So I just wanted to kind of set that framework for how I think about it. And honestly, in the chat, I would love it if you have any thoughts on even just this concept. So if you build a link, your best case scenario is you boost one of your pages. Usually people who are really obsessed with building links to a certain page is because a certain page, a high value page, is not performing very well. So you might see a boost on that page. I'm not going to deny that. However, if you earn the link, you not only have the high authority link going to the page, and a logo you can showcase on your site for being featured in a certain site that values what you created, you also have a piece of content that just goes on forever providing value. It probably exists on your website. You can send it to your email list. You can share it on social. You can post it in communities. We cannot think of it so narrowly as, okay, we got the link. There are so many other benefits to earning the links, whether it's the quality of the links that you're earning or all the auxiliary benefits that come with actually putting in the effort. And I think the hard part about this is it's very tempting to take the cheaper, easier way out, especially if you have higher ups that don't like quite understand the value of creating content and how that takes a little bit longer usually. It can be easy to be like, I'll just give this guy a couple $100 and he'll buy some links and it'll be fine, right? But as we'll get to today, that's not really the most effective way to go about this. So for our first poll, I would love to see how you're currently earning links. Maybe you're not earning them yet. Maybe that's something you aspire to do. Maybe you have an in-house team of people, or you're working with an agency, or you're just doing this on your own. But I would love to get some insights into what your current situation is. So if you can respond to the poll, that would be fantastic. And I'm going to jump in the chat here too.
And so if that poll doesn't show up for you, you can click on the polls tab up on the top and you can see all of your options there. You can vote there and you can also see what everybody else is voting too.
Norm, I love your comment about white hat versus black hat. It is very similar to that. And I think that it's like a different way to think about that concept, right? It's like if you're doing it the white hat way, it means you're actually trying to earn it. Exactly right.
So I closed that poll. Amanda, you can even see that in the polls tab if you click over to the close tab. And so it looks like it's actually like really close between with an in-house team, no one else, and about 27% of people say they're not earning links yet.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I see that now. Yeah, no one else, almost very few have an agency. An in-house team, it's tough, I know. But not earning links yet. This is awesome. This is a great, really even breakdown. Hopefully, I'm going to help everybody. Just this is good context for me to have, especially even if you're not earning links yet or you're trying to improve the quality of these links. I think that this presentation will help. So thank you for filling that out. So for those of you you're trying to do this yourself, or you have a small team, or you're just embarking on this, and if you're thinking about getting an agency, let's talk about how to earn links. So a little bit more background about me and the context that I'm coming at this from is that I work at Stacker Studio. Stacker is a news wire. It is like an AP or Reuters, but more for data journalism and feature news. So they've been around since 2017 and have this wide network of news sites across the country. It's kind of amazing. And our editorial team creates news stories and syndicates them out to these publications. So Stacker Studio, which is what I focus on, is our brand partnership wing. So we started working with brands, creating content on their behalf. And by content, I mean more newsworthy stories, not the typical blog post or press release. We're creating newsworthy stories and we are distributing it through our network. So a lot of the insights that I'm providing today are based on what we've learned from this process, what we've seen publishers picking up, how we are able to create stories that benefit our brand partners while also benefiting publications, which is the key, is always thinking about the publications. We have a whole internal team, a distribution team, a team that's focused on our publisher relationships. And really, that's kind of like the underlying tone to all of this is that you need to be creating things that are actually going to be interesting to publishers and their readers. So I just wanted to give you that context as to what Stacker was so that everything I say makes sense. So like I mentioned, Studio gives brands access to our newsroom. We've created thousands of stories. We've reached so many people across all these different sites, 200 million across all Stacker network. And the average domain rating is 62 of our network. So when we're talking about high quality, one of the ways that people assess this is the domain rating or domain authority or whatever metric that you use, basically being a proxy for how authoritative is that site. When you do this type of work and you're not buying the links and you're not trying to take the sketchier approaches, you tend to get higher domain ratings, higher domain authority sites because they're quality, authoritative news publications, right? It just makes sense that they would be higher quality. So we see that reflected in our newswire. So our strategy, as I mentioned, is taking a newsworthy approach. And don't worry, I'm going to dive into this, as I said at the top. Newsworthy content is one of my other favorite topics to talk about, and it's definitely a core component of this talk. But taking a newsworthy approach to your content and link earning strategy means that you get more high quality news pickups. It means you get more brand authority, which again has wide reaching implications for how people perceive your brand. And it also means you get really great links. So it's not just the news pickups, it also means that you're earning really fantastic links. So what does newsworthy approach mean? It means a few things. And I could do a whole separate presentation on this, but I wanted to highlight 3 of what I consider core tenets of newsworthy content. And we'll go into each one. Please feel free to leave any comments. I'll either address during or after the presentation. But let's start with tangential. Tangential content is basically on the other side of the spectrum from topical. So when you think topical, as you can see here, that's more your actual product, your actual service, and really about like your founders, your company culture, things that are very tied to your brand. That's topical. Those are the press releases of the world, the demos, the case studies, content that's really about what you're offering and trying to sell. Whereas tangential content is much more zoomed out than that. That's how I like to think of it when I imagine tangential. We're not all the way zoomed in on what you're offering. We've zoomed out. And when I say mission, I don't even necessarily mean like your company's specific mission of like, we want to make employee communications better. It might be that we want to improve the workplace for folks, right? For all Americans or everyone all over the world. Your general mission. Why do you exist as a company in a broader sense? How are you providing value to people? Your industry overall. That's definitely zoomed out. We're not just talking about your place in the industry, we're talking about your overall industry. And then a more general audience. So the reason why tangential content is so important for newsworthy approaches is that if you're trying to get top tier links and you're going for more national coverage, it makes sense to want to appeal to a higher or a bigger group of people. If you're only appealing to like 5 people, that's great for other type of marketing initiatives. For this, you want to try to appeal to a wider group of people. So that's what is helpful about zooming out and considering topics more related to your industry or your general mission. So that sweet spot is the overlap between what your brand is generally trying to do and newsworthy elements like tangential content. That is the sweet spot. That's what creates a more tangential approach. So here's some questions you can ask. And what I love about these is they totally overlap with the other elements I'm going to talk about. So the first one is how you could be of service to your wider audience. You can actually use this question for all types of content. It's very effective, even for more topical content. But if you zoom out and you think about your industry instead of just your brand, this question also applies. So this is a really good jumping off point. Number 2, what greater context can you add? And we're going to talk about contextualizing to trending topics or long-standing challenges. Again, this is a broader approach. We're not talking about how people are using your tool or why they're hiring your agency. We're talking about, let's look at broader trends in this category. And can we offer a different take? Do we have a data set we can analyze? Do we have a different opinion we can provide? And number 3, as I mentioned, data, and this is going to be key in the next thing I talk about. What data can you analyze or present to provide that new perspective? So tangential content, much broader. Think about it as zooming out. It's somewhere between your core branding and where your news sites or your news stories would fall under on a news site. Like what category? Like if you were going to try to look for a story about your company, what general category would it fall under? That's the room you have to play with in the tangential world. You don't want to go any farther zoomed out than that, then you're getting super broad. But you also don't want to go too far in either direction where you're not even talking about your industry anymore. You don't want to be a car insurance company talking about pets, right? Like it just doesn't make any sense unless there's some kind of bridge you have between the two. But that is the framework that I tend to use for tangential content. So let's look at an actual example because I can talk all day about hypotheticals, but it's much easier to take a look at a piece of content and understand what I'm talking about. So PIN is one of our brand partners, and we created a story called 10 Aspects of Remote Work Employers and Employees Disagree On. Okay. PIN is an internal communication tool. So we're not specifically talking about internal communication. That would be topical. That would be much more relevant to what they offer. We zoomed out a bit and we're still in the workplace realm, which is relevant to what PIN offers and PIN's audience, but it appeals to many more people. I mean, especially now, so many people care about remote work and want a sense of what the general consensus is. Are businesses moving in one direction or another, and what do people think? So this worked really well for us. We got a ton of coverage. Most of our stories get like 150 to 200 pickups, but I wanted to cover some of the big pieces, the big pickups, because it appeals to so many people. When you see these publications, you understand, oh yeah, I mean, we're talking about remote work. That's a wide audience that this is relevant for. So you can imagine a Chicago Tribune picking that up. You can imagine a Baltimore Sun picking that up. So that's where the tangential piece is really important. Now let's talk about data focused. Data is, if you've never done this before, tangential content or newsworthy content, data is the best way to get into it and stay in it, really. Data is kind of like the key piece here for a few reasons. First reason is it tends to tell an original novel story, even if the data set already exists. There's so much data online that it's very likely that somebody hasn't illustrated it in an effective way in the context of a certain story, or combined different data sets to tell a greater story. The joke I always make is like, we're not sitting around all hanging out on government websites, downloading spreadsheets and wondering what it means. Like the everyday person's just not doing that. At least I'm not, I don't know. And I'm a nerd, so it's just not typically what's happening. So somebody like you or your content team or your agency or your freelancer who says, oh, I found these interesting data sets in this industry, let's take a look at what insights we can pull from that. That's going to be interesting, especially if no one else has done it yet. When you do that type of work, it generally unveils new trends. And people love talking about trends in the news, and it makes sense. We don't want to see what one person's doing, what a handful of people are doing. We want to see what's happening overall across an industry or a location, right? The great thing about data is it often adds more context to a story that's happening, which we'll talk more about in a second. Contextualizing. Data is a great way to contextualize. It can also be broken down demographically, which is awesome, and also helps with contextualizing. So instead of just having national coverage, you could have localized coverage, which again, I can do a whole other presentation about. And if you have questions on that, please put them in the chat because I'm happy to talk about that. But you're able to repurpose the same data set into multiple stories. You can take the national approach, but then you can also say, how does this vary across states in the US, or cities, or zip codes, or countries, right? And maybe there's a different story that emerges if you break it down that way, or break it down by gender, or break it down by age group, right? The other nice thing about data is that it adds immediate credibility. If you imagine pitching something to a news site or a publisher or an editor, if they don't know how you came up with this headline or your conclusions, and they don't know who you are, they're not going to waste time trying to figure it out. That's just not what they're going to do. So if you're able to say, our methodology includes this robust analysis of this credible data set, you're much more likely to get a foot in the door, and you're much more likely to earn the trust of readers as well. So again, if you have never done this before, one of the best ways to do it is to use government data sets. There are so many. This is just a small sampling of ones that we've used. So many government data sets. And again, this is just the US, so I'm a little biased, but there's so much information that's just free and waiting to be analyzed. Check some of these out if they're relevant to your industry. If they're not, and they might be more than you even realize. I mean, the census is so broad, right? And you can take that data and apply it to something else going on. But start there. You can go about content ideation in two different ways. You can either ask yourself, like, do this brainstorm, use those questions I talked about for tangential content, and ask yourself questions that you don't know the answers to, and then wonder how you can get the answers to those. What data can you use? What research can you do manually to find the answer? The other way to do it is to start with a data set. So in this case, maybe you know, okay, one of these government sites is a great fit for us, and maybe some other site that collects data that is a great fit for us too. You keep tabs on those sets of data, see when they're released next, be on top of it, see everything that they're doing, and then come up with ideas by playing around with that data. Try breaking it down demographically, try putting into context that we'll talk about in a second. So here's an example of something that's a little more data focused. So this story that we did for PIN, the most important well-being programs according to workers. So we do this a lot. We add the comma and the source. The reason for that, as I mentioned, is you're building credibility very quickly rather than trying to hope somebody is interested enough in the story and then reads the first couple paragraphs. So instead of, like, if you had just seen the most important well-being programs, you'd be like, okay, but like, according to whom? Is it one person who wrote this who made this decision? This was actually based on a third-party data set. So we're able to build in that credibility up front. And we went ahead and called out that citation in the headline. So if you do take this approach, highly encourage you trying that headline strategy of making it very clear where you got your information from, because there's so much content out there that is subjective and based on a few people's opinion, that it's refreshing to see something that's based on data. And you'll see that show in your content creation, your pitching. You'll see that kind of feedback, that you'll have better results. So this piece got picked up by a bunch of publications, including MSN and the Houston Chronicle, again, because well-being programs are interesting to basically anyone who works in an office and gets benefits, right? It's a broader topic, so it's still tangential. We're building on these elements. In an ideal world, you're doing all three of these things to make a newsworthy piece of content. So then we have contextualization. Contextualizing, like what does that even mean? It's basically just putting things into, oh God, I'm going to be really redundant. It's context. It's looking at things historically. It's comparing to similar things or even different things in order to get a fuller picture, rather than looking at something in a very narrow way. And a lot of the times when something happens, especially breaking news, there's no time immediately to sit there and think about every possible angle to the story. The priority is we need to get this news out. This is really important. But as topics develop, as trends develop, there are other pieces of data, other interesting insights that can add more color, more information to a story that's happening. And this is where brands can participate. Brands are never going to be participating in breaking news. I mean, unless you have like a 100-person newsroom and you're not telling me, or you're one of these in-house people that has like an entire media corporation on your side. So these are 3 questions to think about. When I was talking to one of our heads of research, one of the examples he gave me was like, think about the budget. On the Hill, they're proposing a certain budget for education, right? You can think, what's the history of education budget in the US? That would be interesting to know. Are they proposing more, less? What's happening there? You don't have that if you're only reporting on the current proposed budget number. You just don't have the context. You can also compare it to other budget lines. So when you say different, I think it's easy to think about how to compare to similar things, but if you're thinking how to compare to different things, you can think, okay, what about the military budget? Or what about even more different, just some other spending done somewhere else, just to put it into context. Like huge numbers don't really mean anything to a lot of people. So what does that number mean? And how does that translate in a different way? So this is just a list of questions to get your mind going, just to have a launching point. But that's essentially what we're getting at when it comes to contextualization. So here's a piece about how different generations feel about remote work. And it's interesting, when I was pulling these stories for PIN, that we talk about remote work a lot, and it makes sense because of the tangential component. It affects a lot of people right now, and it's timely. So in this case, we were able to compare different generations with each other. So we're contextualizing by comparing the generations. And again, when you use data, it's easier to do that. We're able to add more nuance to a conversation, just as the first piece did, really, about the difference between what employees and employers think about remote work. Now we're looking at the way different generations feel about remote work. But instead of making assumptions across the board, or saying, I'm making this up, disclaimer, 70% of people are happy about remote work or would prefer to work remotely forever. That's a very broad percentage. It's a useful one to have. You want to know overall where things are trending. But it's also interesting to dig into that number. What about the difference between employees and employers? That is a key differentiation, because even if all employees want that, that doesn't necessarily mean the employers are ready to make that leap. And then again, generations, maybe, people who are used to being on the computer all the time, whatever, those all stereotypes, but are more likely to want to work remotely. Whatever it is, I don't know. This piece would know. That's why it's interesting, and that's why people will click on it. It's adding context to trending topics that maybe you have not seen yet. I don't know why I went with the Sesame Street theme for these GIFs, but just, go with it. This piece got picked up on a bunch of places. Just wanted to include a few examples. But again, it is very relatable and interesting, because I care about remote work, and then I care about, well, maybe there are differences in who is on board with remote work, and maybe that will be reflected in policy that happens within companies, right? It's just an interesting take. So in the context, I was about to say in the context of contextualizing, I'm going to need to stop saying this word. But to give you a different perspective on this topic, I wanted to pull a quote directly from one of our publishing partners, because it's easy, like I mentioned before, to lose sight of why we're taking this approach in the first place. It's not only because we want to create a great piece of content, it's because we're trying to do what's going to help publishers the most and their readers. So we heard from Elizabeth Miller. She's the editor of the Auburn Examiner, and she was saying that a lot of our content that is tied directly to current issues that they're covering. I mean, they're a newspaper, they're investing resources in covering these important breaking news or long time, but still crucial trending topics. We create stories that complement and contextualize those things. And in doing so, not only are we getting them more readers, but we're reigniting the interest in the stories that they had already produced. I think this is really important, and I think it helps recalibrate our thinking around why we're creating the content and pitching it and how to create the content and pitch it. It's not just about the links, and this is the difference between building and earning again. We're not just trying to get the link and then that's the end. If you're thinking that way, you're not going to have this perspective of, okay, if I create this piece of content, it's because I think that it'll actually help even the business goals of the publications that I'm pitching this to, or the website that I'm pitching this to. So I wanted to have a brief moment to talk about that, acknowledge that. Love to hear any comments you have in that realm, but I think that's really important. Okay, so I just talked a lot about creating newsworthy content. It was kind of the crash course, and that's all well and good, and it's a big part of the battle. But now it's a matter of, you put in all this work, you spent money or dedicated resources and spent time to create really great content, and now you want to know the results. So let's get into that, why this is worth doing, how you're going to be able to report on the impact of this. But first, let's jump into our second poll. I want to know from you, what is the hardest part about earning links? It's likely that you're going to have more than one answer to this, but please respond. I think this is like a really interesting ongoing question. I want to know what's the hardest, and this will help me decide what to spend the most time on in this next section.
All right, it looks like they're just starting to come in. And so far you're winning. Earning high quality links is winning that one for you, Amanda.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, that's what this presentation is about, so it makes sense. It's a topic that a lot of people struggle with. All of them, yeah, Anya, I understand that. That's why I wonder, scaling. Yeah, so scaling, we can get to that, because you need the foundation first. So especially if you're somebody who has that foundation, it makes total sense that you're like, okay, I spent all this time creating a piece of content and I got a couple of links, but like I need to earn more. We want to scale faster. I totally understand that.
All right, we're going to close poll.
Yeah, 70% earning high quality links. Wow. And then 20% scaling, almost 20% measuring, and then almost nobody with the budget. That's great. You have the budget to do it. That's awesome. A lot of people don't have that and they have to fight for that. So that's super interesting for me to see. Okay, so let's just jump right back in. Thank you for doing that. So I want to give you an overview of the results that we earned for PIN, because I showed you 3 of the stories. I believe we did somewhere between 6 and 8. I have to pull out the numbers. We earned 1,300 media pickups with an average domain rating of 57. Again, these are high quality. That's the average. So that means a lot of them were higher than that. Effective cost per link, I'm always wary to show because we're not paying for these. This is just trying to reach people in the mindset of paying for them and be like, look, it's actually really valuable to do the earn link way. And then you can see the breakdown of the domain rating, where a lot of them fall between this 50 and 75 range. So this is kind of incredible in terms of, yes, it was a lot of work. We literally have a newsroom of people who are creating these stories, and we have a distribution network that we can utilize. But the results can be pretty massive. And I'm going to explain really quickly how we are able to communicate that value and really get the most out of that value. So when we create a story, whether it's for our general newsroom or not, we create a really data-driven piece most of the time, and it either goes on Stacker.com if it's just a normal piece, or if we're working with a brand partner, it goes on our brand partner's website. Okay, so we publish the piece there, and then we syndicate it through Stacker.com out to our publishing network. As I said, that's usually like on average 150 to 200 publishers end up picking up the story, and they have follow links pointing back to the brand partner's story, and also canonicals. Not all of you are going to be working in the syndication realm. We work in the syndication realm. So canonicals are very important. They are signaling that we were the original creators of a piece of content. So all of that authority, if Chicago Tribune is republishing something you did in full, that's a big authority signal. That's saying they not only trusted you, they trusted the entire piece of content enough to republish it to their audience. But whether it's links or canonicals, all of that equity is going to your site. The reason I wanted to have this slide is because it doesn't necessarily stop there in terms of getting the most out of the link building efforts. We also utilize internal linking to carry that link equity to other parts of your site that are really critical. So if you're in link building or link earning, either one, and you know how difficult it is to earn links to category or product pages or other money pages, it is almost impossible. People have asked me, like, what's the secret? I'm like, I don't know. If you know, let me know, because I've never found it. So you take that link equity that you're earning to your site, and then you incorporate internal links to those pages. As long as it makes sense, you don't have it be like completely out of left field. But that way you're carrying that link equity to other parts of your site, and then you can really start seeing the full impact of this work. So link results come in first. And this is the other thing I'm going to break down, is this doesn't all happen at once. And it doesn't sound like a lot of you have a lot of internal buy-in problems. If you have the budget, that's great. But if you don't have the budget, or if you do have the budget, but still you need to do a better job of reporting on what's happening, the link results come in first. And by that, I mean literally knowing we earned these links. Here we're showing the increase in referring domains over time. We started working with them in August, so you can see the spike happen pretty fast. And then you can also be tracking the domain rating of those sites, or maybe the relevancy, or any other quality metrics you have for the links that you're earning. All of that can happen pretty quickly. These are the first things you're going to be able to report on. And this is a sign that things are going well. You want this to happen. You want to be able to, we're talking about scaling. This is not something that you can just do once and then be like, okay, we're done. We built some links, we earned some links, and that's the end. Then after that, you're earning these awesome links. Hopefully your domain rating of your site starts to trend up. This will depend on where you're currently at. If you're a domain rating of 80, you're probably not going to jump to 85, right? It's going to take a lot to get you there. But if you're in a lower range of domain rating, you can start to see that trend upward over the next 6 months. So this is the second thing you can start keeping an eye out on. And when you're building that link equity to your site, that's what this is helping. The internal linking can help with other results that come in, like organic pages. So if you're looking at an increase in the number of pages on your site that are ranking, if you do this approach, you'll want to look overall at, okay, in general, our pages increasing. What gets tricky is if you're doing multiple initiatives at the same time, so you don't really know what to directly attribute this to. But if you've launched a major link earning initiative, it's very likely that increasing your domain rating and your overall brand authority is helping with this. Because obviously, if Google sees your site and your brand as more authoritative than it did 6 months ago, it's more likely to rank your results for specific keywords, right? But even more so, if you're utilizing internal linking to specific pages, so track those pages as well. Call those out when you're trying to see if something's working, if you're trying to report on the value of what you're doing, see who you're internally linking to and how that's affecting the number of pages that are ranking for different search results. because then once you're able to earn the links, see your domain rating increase, see that you have multiple pages ranking higher in the SERPs, or search engine result pages, sorry for my jargon, then your organic traffic starts to go up. And this happens last and is the most looked at metric, I think, for marketers across the board. This is what they can report on for themselves to be like, this is working, we're getting more people to our site, but also for their higher ups. If your boss is curious as to why you're spending all this money and earning links rather than taking the easy way out, you can let them know that this is not a short-term play. This is a long-term investment that will show organic growth in a sustainable way that benefits your brand overall and makes your customers and your clients happier. So that's kind of the progression of results that come from this type of work, but it's important to break it down that way to set expectations for us and also for either our clients if you work in an agency or for your internal stakeholders. And the last thing that I want to touch on is this is just one piece of the SEO puzzle. You can't link earn your way out of critical foundational SEO problems or content problems. So all over to the left, we have technical SEO. Your site needs to be sound from a technical SEO perspective. So if you have a totally crap site that Google can't crawl or understand, it doesn't really matter that you're earning links, right? Similar to on-site content though, a lot of people don't have, and you don't have to necessarily be like a content-driven company for this to matter. It could be blog posts and resource pages or whatever it is, but even the copywriting on your site, are you explaining your products and services well? Your like actual content that lives on your site has to be worthy of the rankings you're trying to earn. You'll see sometimes that things rank that you don't think should, and that's because Google's still trying to figure out all the nuances of ranking. But in general, your content has to be deserving of that ranking. And then when you earn those links to that already deserving content and to a site that's technically SEO sound, I did not say that right, that's when you see the organic traffic kick in. So I just wanted to emphasize that you can't just do this one tactic and then hope for the best. You have to have this three-pronged approach, and link earning is a critical 1/3 of that strategy. So I just talked for a long time. I am dying to hear any questions that you have, and I really appreciate you coming to this talk, and thank you.
Amanda, that was really good stuff. We got a lot of questions, so let's get right to it. I'll let you take a drink of water.
Like I said, my allergies are getting to me. Usually I can talk forever.
I hear that. All right, so we had a couple kind of questions that let's just do a little bit of clarification. So Benjamin asks, can you please explain the difference between a do follow and a no follow backlink?
Oh, sure. This is a hotly contested question if you ask certain SEO folks, but on the basic level, you can add different attributes to links. So if you ever were on a site and you want to look at the link and you right click and hit inspect, you'll actually see it in the code. And no follow is basically an attribute that says do not carry the link equity that I'm talking about, the value or the authority of this link to the other site. A lot of publishers do this. It's their policy to no follow all links. And the debate comes into how much value there is in earning those types of links. I think that there's value in any sort of brand mention, even without a link. I think it's just tiered in terms of how effective they are, right? So I don't think it's, if you get earn a no follow link, that's not a reason to like cry and think you failed. I think that it is different from a follow link, and that's why you hear that a lot. You hear do follow or follow links. Those are just your standard links. There's nothing added to them. They are carrying, Google is looking at those links and saying, okay, they deserve kind of like this credit that they're getting, this kind of like reputation bump that they're getting. Whereas a no follow is saying to Google, no, we don't really want to pass on this authority to that other site. So it's just, yeah, it's a little technical. Most people are kind of going for the follow links because traditionally those are known to help your site the most. But I don't want to discredit nofollow altogether.
Perfect. So Anya asks, how do you pitch to these news sources? That's more PR than backlinking. So she's coming into link building SEO from PR, and she wants to learn how to leverage that skill set.
Yes. So pitching is involved in a lot of this, right? And Michelle Garrett's in the chat. If you're big on pitching, you should go also chat her because she's great at this. And this is a lot of the agency side work that I was doing. At Stacker, we have the privilege of having a news network that we can send stuff to, so it makes it a lot easier. If you're pitching content, you do all the same things that I was talked about here. And then when you go to pitch, you need to do a ton of research about who you're pitching. None of this templated, send it to everybody stuff. You need to understand not just the publication that you're pitching to, but the writer, because each writer has their own specific beat. And you need to have a very good sense of why you're creating a piece of content for their audience. If you don't know that, you're not going to be able to communicate that in an email to them, and they are going to throw your email away. They're going to trash it, and you're done. So when it comes to pitching, sometimes if you have in your head like, oh, I really want these certain publications, then you really need to be studying those publications and see what the type of content that they're creating. And, a whole other topic would be creating a pitch email. But essentially, you want to get to the point very quickly in your email, personalize it a little bit so they know that it's not a templated email, and say, like, here are the interesting parts of this research that I did, and this is why I think your audience would be interested. But I think that the part that a lot of people skip is the research on the writer rather than the publisher. They kind of just send it off and pray that the person opens their email and clicks on everything and, the whole nine. But that's the very top level advice that I have for that.
It's all about that quality, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
It makes everything else easier if you do it right from the beginning, if you really put the time in at the beginning.
Yeah. So I've seen this, I think, a couple times, maybe the same person, maybe not. But Joe asks, does HARO fit into the strategy here? Do you consider that earned?
HARO is earned for sure. I don't think it's necessarily this strategy. It's just another version of it. It's just not really content. It's earning from more of a PR perspective, if that makes sense. Depending on how you're responding to HARO. If you're like, oh, we want to talk to somebody about XYZ, you didn't have to create a piece of content. You're providing value by providing an expert. So it's not black hat by any means. It's just a different approach to earning. I've definitely focused this presentation on the content side of earning, which is a significant portion of this work. But HARO is an outlet to, okay, who do we have at our company that knows a lot about a topic, and how do we leverage that expertise and give them direct access to publishers? That's definitely another way to do it.
Okay, so Joe asks, creating content like this is great. However, I have to wonder more about the ability to plug a brand into something like this. Is it a passive mention, or is there some kind of call to action involved?
This is a great question, and it's very pivotal to the spectrum of topical to tangential. The thing is, we're not ever plugging a brand, to your point. We're not like, hey, and then also this brand exists and you should check out their site. The way that you're earning the link is by being the source of the information. So in that second paragraph, it's saying, so-and-so did this study, so-and-so analyzed this data, so-and-so compiled XYZ. That's where the link is going. The piece is not about your brand, and it's never going to be in there. Now on your site, you can maybe, add a little bit more about your brand, but if for anything you're sending to a publisher, the reason you're getting the link is because you're the citation, you're the source. That's where that's coming from. Because I agree with you. You cannot, anytime you start getting at all on the advertising side of things, the publisher's gonna be like, no. Like, that's not what I'm here for. I'm not here to run this piece about this car insurance company. I'm here to run a piece about the study that you did, but nothing about you. So that's how you end up earning the link.
So this is a good question from James. And he says, this is a question about the last poll. What exactly would you need a budget for when it comes to link building? If we already have a content team and they have the bandwidth to write content, is there any monetary budget we need to be setting aside for link building that he might not be aware of?
So great point. Content is, if you have an internal content team, that's awesome. However, it depends on how that content team is set up. Are they data analysts? Are they equipped to do that kind of research, et cetera, et cetera? If they are, you still have to figure out a way to distribute, either build syndication relationships, do digital PR, the promotion side. How are you actually earning the links? Who's doing the outreach? So maybe if you already have an internal outreach team or something like that, then you don't need extra budget to do the link earning. But I think that's the piece from what you have said. If you're creating the content, there's still that missing piece to earning the links. Now, there are cases where you're creating amazing content that's ranking really well and they'll start naturally earning links. That's a whole different strategy. And that can be done, but that's not usually your full link earning strategy. It's usually not comprehensive enough to kind of put your whole company on earning natural links. You usually have to be a little more proactive as well when you're creating these studies, because people aren't really going to find them. You have to have promotions or an agency or partner that does that part for you, because creating the content's only half the battle, unfortunately.
That makes sense. Let's see. We definitely have some good questions here. I don't think we're going to get to them all, Amanda, so you might have some follow-up to do. So let's see. Norm asks, what kind of link earning performance difference do you see between stories using third-party data sets versus doing original research and data collection?
Sorry, can you repeat the first part of that? What kind of what do we see?
Link earning performance difference.
Performance.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that terribly matters much. I think that if you have robust, accurate internal data, go for it. And the reason why I kind of caveat that is a lot of us think our internal data is really interesting, but when it comes from like a news editor's discerning eye, you really have to be able to speak to a pretty accurate data set. Some really obvious brands, big brands, have that kind of data, right? It's like why Spotify can release interesting reports, or Zillow or whatever. But if you're a smaller brand, it might be a little trickier. That being said, if you do think you have something there that's really interesting, certainly internal data has the added benefit of like you being able to use it for other brand authority efforts, like being able to put that all over your site and send it to your audience and be like, we did this. That's really cool. But I think that using external data is totally fine. And that's what we use all the time. So if you aren't in a place where you're like, I don't have just like, and even if you have internal data, you probably can't do like multiple stories based on it. Like you probably can do one a quarter, one a year, and that's it. So really do encourage the external data. Maybe you're collaborating with another brand, whatever it is. There's a lot of different ways to go about it, but external data also works really well. And I don't think it necessarily matters when somebody's reading the piece you put together. They're not going to be critical, I don't think, about where the data necessarily came from, as long as it's legitimate, as long as it's credible. Whether it was from you or somebody else, you still did the work of being like, I'm not talking about you just like lifting a graph somebody else did and then like pitching that out. That's not what I mean. But if you have a data set that somebody else put together and you're analyzing it in a new way and creating those graphs and that analysis, that's great. That will definitely work.
Okay, so Lisa is asking, is there a different approach for local content?
Because I touched on local, right? The different approach, not in what I've said, just in some of the execution. So if you have a data set where you're able to localize, something that we do, we actually have like a product that's localizing some of our content. So if we have a national story that goes out, and we know we also have the data for all the zip codes in the US, we'll release those stories with different headlines and just switching up the order of things a little bit. So say we had a list of all the 50 states and their rankings of, unemployment rates. Okay, you can do a national story and say, these are the states with the highest unemployment rates, but you can also pitch those specific cities at the top or the bottom of the list with their name of their city has the lowest or highest unemployment rate. That's much more interesting to you. I mean, think about if you got a piece of content to your inbox that said nationally versus where you live. You're much more likely to click on the one where you live. So the approach is, okay, if you do have that information, thinking about that when you're creating the piece of content and making sure you have the capability of repackaging it. And then when you're promoting it, like I said, like the way that we do it is we re-promote it to people at those different, we have a ton of local publications in our network. We know that they care more about what's happening to them than they do nationally, right? So that's where the shift happens, you're still creating, you can still create tangential, data-driven, contextual content. It's just okay, we might have to do a little more legwork in terms of the content, and then we probably need to pitch this differently, but you'll get you'll earn a ton of links that way because you're able to pitch a few different angles.
I think that makes sense. So Calvin asks, how does syndicated content work around the issue of being seen as duplicate by Google?
Sure. Get this question a lot, and that's where the canonical comes in, because a canonical tag basically says, we know that this piece of content lives elsewhere and they should get the credit for this. It's the original source. So when Chicago Tribune picks up our story, whether it's our brand partner or Stacker.com, has the canonical pointing to them. The catch to that, and it's not really a catch, is that you just can't change what you have on your site if you're using a canonical. Like, you can't change all the content. You can't add a bunch of CTAs or something. The canonical might break. So you got to make sure it's the same piece of content. But this is like our foundation for our strategy, is that we syndicate the content. And again, if it's an authoritative site choosing to republish something that you have done and they have the canonical incorporated correctly, that's a huge authority signal, as is the link. They're saying, we liked this piece of content enough to completely republish it on our site. So Google sees that and they're like, okay, like, that's an authoritative site deciding to republish this. That says something about the quality of this piece of content. So canonicals are how it's not seen as duplicate content if the canonical is incorporated.
Okay, so we'll see if we have time for one more or two more, but so Barbara asks, how does one reach out to sites to let them know that your content exists?
Right. So that goes back to the pitching side of things. I think I kind of answered that. If you have this is where you either have to have an internal person or team, preferably, or a partner, an external partner, an agency or something, because it does take a lot more work than anybody ever realizes until they have to do it themselves. Because the templated stuff, just like mass sending emails, it just doesn't work anymore. It really doesn't work. I get these emails all the time, people pitching me every single day, and I don't read a single one of them, because I know that they're not putting any thought into pitching me. They don't actually care about me and what I'm doing. They're just trying to get the link. And that's the link building perspective. The link earning perspective means, okay, I created this awesome piece of content and I think it's going to be a great fit for this handful of publications. Or in our case, we have a network that we are constantly communicating with, so we know what they are looking for. That kind of feedback and understanding is the first part. Then you can pitch them via email. All different ways you can find their email addresses. Sometimes it's literally on the site. Sometimes it's on their Twitter account. You can use an extension called Hunter in Chrome. That's awesome. I'll plug that. It's free. But if you're not, or you can set up a syndication partnership, especially for smaller sites, maybe in your industry, if you're trying to just set up a more direct partnership with somebody more relevant to you. But you are going to have to be doing some cold outreach, especially if you're not using a partner. Yes, BuzzSumo and SEMrush are great tools as well. Thanks, Rob. Thanks. I said Rob. Thanks, Mike. And I know that there's a million questions. I will get to as many of these as I can, but you can also email me. I'll type in my email. It's just amilligan@stacker.com. Feel free to send me an email after this, and I will get back to you. I'm also on Twitter all the time. So either of those, because I would really like to answer everyone's questions.
That's awesome, because you took my next question, which was tell the people where to find you. It's like my favorite question to ask at the end.
I'm sorry, I ruined it.
No, that's awesome. So, I mean, as you can see, these questions are some of them are pretty in depth. So I don't think we can get to any fully answered in the last bit of time that we have. So Amanda, any kind of closing last words you want to leave everybody with?
It's hard work, but it pays off. Please email me if you have more specific, if you did get more in depth with your question, or you have kind of like one-off things about what you're specifically doing. I'm happy to get more in the weeds to help you. But thank you. And I'm glad that there's other folks out there who are down for the link earning approach rather than link building. But thank you for having me. This was really fun.
Awesome. Thank you for being here with us. Thanks for everybody who stuck around and stayed with us this afternoon. Again, quick survey if you've got time for that. Otherwise, you'll get this recording later. So check your inbox for that. And with that, we're just going to let everybody go. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks all.
Bye.